Hi, thanks for stopping by to find out a bit about the Journal of Flood Risk Management. I'm Sarah Anderton and I'm currently providing maternity cover for our lovely publications manager Vicky Harris, who's back in September. For background, the Journal of Flood Risk Management was set up in 2008 and has since become an internationally recognised journal with an impact factor of over 3. In this video, our Editor-in-Chief, Paul Samuels, is going to be giving a couple of presentations. One on getting your research published in the journal and another on reviewing papers for the journal. Once you've watched Paul's presentations, don't forget to scroll down to find out a little bit more about our journal and to make a note of our live times. Without further ado, let me hand you on to Paul.
Hello everyone. I want to talk to you today about publishing your paper in the Journal of Flood Risk Management. And I'm Paul Samuels. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of the journal and I am also working at HR Wallingford. I thought it might be helpful to give you a personal note as to why I can talk about this topic. Well, I've had over 100 journal and conference contributions in my career, which goes back into the 1970s. I've been a peer reviewer for several journals and since 1985. I am on the science committee of the Journal of River Basin Management and have been associate editor for the Journal of Flood Risk Management for the first 6 years, from 2007 to 2013. And I've been editor-in-chief since 2014. The outline of what I want to talk about today is here. First of all, a few points on why you should publish, what you should publish, why you should choose the Journal of Flood Risk Management, and then some comments on the peer review process and copyright issues, and finally a few closing remarks. So, on to why publish. Well, I see firstly publication is probably good for your organisation. It'll add to your track record and your profile with your clients, whether those are commercial clients or research clients. It enhances your credibility for accessing research funds, and a new paper is an opportunity for publicity for your organisation. Secondly, it's good for you. It strengthens your CV, especially for research bids, and it enhances your own career profile. Publication is a recognised form of continuing professional development, which if you're a member of SciWEM or any other professional body, you'll be committed to do a certain amount of professional development each year. And finally, you may have a contract, and this is, I'm thinking here, particularly a research contract, which requires publication as part of the contract conditions. So that's why you should publish. Then, what should you publish? I think the most important thing is that you've got to have something interesting and new to say. These could come as results of a research contract. They could be a novel application you've done or a novel case study where something new has come out. And for students, I'm thinking here of research students, it could be a chapter of your PhD thesis. One measure of a PhD thesis is often that there should be 3 or 4 research papers can come out of what is done in the PhD. Another reason why you might publish is that you were asked to write a paper, whether it's a paper on a specific topic or you were asked to prepare a review of a certain area. Now you have a couple of key decisions to make. Firstly, are you going to be a single author? Is it going to be your work only? Or should you have a collaboration with one or more colleagues? And then, have you chosen the right journal? So why should you choose the Journal of Flood Risk Management? Well, you should look at the aims and scope and the audience of the journal as to be published on the website. We cover all aspects of flood risk management, and this is set out on our online author's guide. You may wish to consider the reputation of the journal when you're seeking as to which journal you should publish in. The Journal of Flood Risk Management has a good impact factor for the 2-year and 5-year impact analysis. And also we have a social media presence which will help to get papers publicised. We are an open access publication. Now that means the author pays for an article publication charge, but reading is free. Now there is an arrangement between Wiley and many research funders for the publication charge to be covered rather than it to come out of your organisation's own budget. And finally, that in Journal of Flood Risk Management, there's a lot of author assistance is available from Wiley through their website. Now, when you've submitted your paper, it's going to be reviewed. The review process we operate at the Journal of Flood Risk Management is called single blind. That is, the reviewers are anonymous. You won't know who has reviewed your paper, but your name as an author is known to the reviewer. The first decision you get can be any one of the following 4 things. It could be accept it as it is. Now that is probably very unlikely because most papers require some sort of revision. And these are minor revision or major revision. A minor revision is further clarification of small points may be required, some corrections to language, but major revision almost certainly would involve you in doing more work. And finally, there is reject. And reject is because the paper is not suitable for the journal, so you've misjudged what we're looking for, or the quality may not be up to what we need. There is a possibility that as Editor-in-Chief, I will give you an invitation to rewrite and resubmit your paper. We think the topic is okay, but significant work is still required. And that's a personal, comes as a personal recommendation from me. Now, acceptance criteria for your paper to be published. Firstly, it should be in the scope of the journal and it should be topical. You've got to make a distinctive contribution to flood risk management knowledge or understanding or flood risk management practice. There should be no plagiarism. That is, representing your own work, which you've had published elsewhere, or even more seriously, claiming the work which others have done is yours. So there should be no plagiarism. Next, we will look for sound methodology and science. And that's a key part of the reviewer's task, is to check on the methodology and science which you're using. We look for papers which are well written and illustrated. So your abstract has to provide a succinct summary of the key results and the innovation in your paper. You need to describe the state of art reasonably well in your introduction. Your conclusions should be substantiated by the main content of the paper. And finally, you need to give up-to-date references. Once you have the reviews in and a request for major or minor modifications, you should respond to these by reading the reviews and the editor's guidance carefully. And I would say editors because there'll be guidance from the editor-in-chief and guidance from the associate editor who commissions the reviews. When you're preparing your response, you should be respectful of what has been given to you as the reviewers and editors' opinions. And you need to take particular care if you disagree with any of the recommended revisions. You shouldn't ignore any comments which have been given, and you need to provide a commentary on the changes which you make in light of the comments. If you think that a point raised by the reviewer or editor doesn't require a change, then you must give a clear justification of why that is so. And that should be in your response to the reviews document, which you're going to submit alongside your revised paper. You should include in your paper the essence of your response to reviewers' comments. It is usually not sufficient just to make a private response to the reviewer. That's because if the reviewer had a query on a certain point, then so may any other reader. So you should make a change to the paper to add a short explanation of the response which you're making to the reviewer. Now, if the changes require a significant increase in the length of the paper, and that's probably more the case for a major revision, then you should make a case to the editor for this increase in the words. Now, in terms of copyright, you need to get permission from and form of acknowledgement for any of the illustrations you use which have been published elsewhere. You need to go to the copyright holder. It's the journal or organisation who has the rights to that particular figure. Now, the copyright terms for publication depend upon publisher and the publication model. Now, the Journal of Flood Risk Management now is open access, which means to say that you're given a Creative Commons license where you, as author, retain rights to your publication. And open access papers are free for you to share. You should refer also to the contract conditions for funded work to see if your research contract funder actually wishes to retain the copyright in any material which you produce from that project. And you need to take care if you're posting your paper to ResearchGate or academia as research repositories. Normally, for the Journal of Flood Risk Management, you can post a link to the paper rather than the paper itself. And finally, a few closing remarks. You can consider involving experienced colleagues to help you with your paper, particularly if you have never written one before. You should consult the publisher's online guidance, as is available from the Wiley Author Services, and I've given a link there to where you would find it. You should publicise your paper using social media tools, and the journal can assist you in this. You can share links with colleagues and contacts, so you alert people who you know ought to be you'd like to read your work, that your paper is there. And finally, I'd say update your CV and your CPD record with the paper when you've published it. I hope you found these few points on publishing your paper in the Journal of Flood Risk Management helpful, and I look forward to receiving your article soon. Thank you very much. Hello, my name is Paul Samuels and I'm the Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Flood Risk Management. And I want to talk to you today about how to review papers for publication in the journal. Now, an outline of what I want to say is that to explain why you've been invited, what the editor is going to need from you in your review, some practicalities about preparing your review, the criteria for making different recommendations as a result of your review, then a few comments of what's going to happen after you've submitted your review, and some closing remarks. So why have you been invited to review? Well, the Journal of Flood Risk Management requires 2 independent peer reviews of any manuscript which is submitted for publication. There are cases in which we will ask for a 3rd or possibly even a 4th review if we feel that we need further information before we can make a publication decision. But usually it's only 2 independent reviews which we seek. Now, the associate editor who's in charge of the reviews will have identified you as having experience and expertise because of several reasons. Firstly, you may have submitted something to the journal. You've maybe cited in the manuscript which we've received for review. You may have acted as a valuable reviewer before. We do try to limit the number of times we ask our experienced reviewers to act for us to only maybe 3 or 4 times a year at the most. It may be that you've written relevant publications in the area, or your name is in our database of reviewers, which we've prepared from people who've undertaken reviews and submissions to the journal over the past 10 years or so. Now, what does the editor need from you? Well, first of all, I would say a review that is submitted on time, but this is negotiable if you are pressed when the review invitation comes in, and you can say, well, can I do it in, say, 4 or 5 weeks rather than the 3 which we normally ask for? Now, we seek an informed and unbiased professional opinion of the paper. So if you're unfamiliar with the topic, do turn down the invitation. And I think you can say why you're turning it down is that this isn't really in your topic. And if you do have a record in our database, if you have an account with us, make sure that your keywords of experience and expertise are up to date. We need from you also confidential comments or opinion on any issue that you do not wish to mention openly to the authors. This could be, for instance, alerting us to the potential for plagiarism in the paper. Now, as a result of your review, we are looking for a recommendation that is backed up by the narrative of your comments which you make to the author. You should identify important issues which are in line with your recommendation, and you should also suggest changes in detail. That's down to maybe spellings or rephrasing, particularly at the minor revision stage. And we need an attached document which can be passed to the reviewer anonymously if you wish. So rather than typing in a lot of things into the review form, you can prepare a separate document in Word and then submit that rather than cut and paste into the review form. Now, if you are commenting on a version of the paper, which is available to you to download from the Reviewer Centre, be careful about tracking comments by name, with your name against it in the PDF or Word version of the paper, because reviewing is anonymous. Now, your primary role as a reviewer is to assess the scientific and practical merit of the paper. You should also advise on the structure of the text, the quality of the language. This is going to take time. And I think you need to set aside several hours in order to do the task. When I've reviewed papers, which I've done for more than a decade, I need to maybe put aside anything between 2 and 5 hours to prepare a review. Depends on how you find the paper and how familiar I am with the topic. It's helpful if you can separate your comments into different categories, such as general observations. Is it in scope for the journal? Is there innovation here which would warrant publication? Then you should list key areas for correction and improvement. And you may wish to give a list of minor corrections to language and formatting and things like that. When you prepare your review, it's helpful for the corrections and improvements to be referenced to page and line numbering or section number of the paper for each of the points you raise. That will help the author respond to your review. And I think that if you're preparing a document with your review in it, that's probably best in MS Word or another word processing application, then saved into PDF form, which will protect your anonymity. Now I want to turn to the criteria for recommendations. There's quite a lot here. So I'm going to start with when you should recommend reject. First of all, you should recommend rejection if there is plagiarism or other fraud. In other words, it is not genuinely new work. And it's not being passed, someone else's work being passed off as their own. Now, next thing is the work should follow good scientific practice. So if the methodology is not sound, then you should then recommend rejection. It could be that the topic of the paper lies outside the scope of the journal. It could be that if somebody's writing in English as a second language, that you don't really understand, and the language issues are so severe that they will need to be corrected before you can give an honest opinion of the value of the work. You should recommend reject if there is no evidence the paper makes a really distinctive contribution to flood risk management, knowledge or understanding or practice. We don't want to just publish the same material, the same type of material that is already out there for people to read. You should recommend rejection if there are serious faults in the work which lead to incorrect conclusions in any of things like the founding concepts, the basic methodology, the analysis, or the mistakes in the empirical evidence which have been collected. If a paper has been revised already, and this is usually that there has been a major revision has been asked, and you think the same faults still remain, then you can recommend the paper is rejected, particularly if you consider that your previous advice has been ignored and the authors haven't given a reasoned counter argument. As a reviewer, I am irritated if the authors do not take on board what I say and either explain to me why I am actually incorrect and the author's opinion should stay, or make the change which I've asked for. So now moving on for criteria for major revision. Here that none of the gross faults, which I've already explained, which would cause a recommendation to reject, are there. But it may be that the current state of knowledge or practice isn't sufficiently explained in the introduction. It could be that the methods and the analysis and so on are not explained fully or sufficiently in the paper for a general reader. It could be that the analysis lacks firm evidence to the extent that it's not clear as to how the results arise. But you think that with appropriate reworking, this could be corrected, but reworking is needed. And that's the essence of a major revision, is that significant additional work may be needed to correct the faults in the paper. It may be that you would recommend further experimental field survey empirical evidence is needed and should be collected. You may think that the paper is poorly structured, and in this point you should offer your opinion as to how the information may be better laid out. Could be that there are too many or too few figures and tables for the topic of the paper. The figures and the tables are there to help the reader understand what the author is writing. And occasionally we do get papers where the subject matter of the paper doesn't match the title or the abstract. And in this case, that is, again, would be a major revision. Now, turning to the language, it might be that the paper you think can be substantially shortened without changing the essence of what is being said. So the language could be verbose, there's unnecessary padding. And if this is your opinion, then perhaps you should be giving some examples, quotes from the paper, and say how you would rephrase it. But there is no need to go all the way through, but provide some illustrative examples to let the author work on it. It could be that the language is difficult to understand, it's not idiomatic. It could be a problem with translation. And again, sorting out translation problems is probably a major revision. Could be that the paper actually reads as if it's a different sort of document altogether, such as a consultancy report or a conference paper. And it could be that although the content in general and the topic is appropriate, it hasn't been restructured into a journal paper rather than a consultancy report. And for a conference paper, a journal paper based on a conference paper probably needs some new information, enhancement and justification, because the two types of paper are actually different. The first is to a conference paper, you would intend to generate discussion at the conference and get questions which you would answer. But in a journal, you should be trying to think of what those questions would be and give enough information in the paper for the audience to understand it. It could be that the conclusions which are written at the end of the paper aren't supported by the analysis in the main body of the paper. The conclusions shouldn't really introduce anything new, but they should collect together the important points which are in the body of the paper. The conclusion, if there is new points, can be produced in a discussion with appropriate external references to back up the comments which are being made. It could be that despite shortcomings in data, methodology, results, and so on, you think the paper has sufficient potential for publication once all these other issues are satisfactorily resolved. In that case, you should recommend major revision. Now, moving on to minor revision. Well, there should be no serious methodological concerns at this point. Some restructuring of contents and figures could still be needed. The authors may need to put their research into a broader context, probably in the introduction. The authors need to highlight more clearly the originality of their research and hence their contribution. Quite often you find that the author has less of a view as to what's new than perhaps the reviewer has. It may be that further explanation is necessary on some points, in which case, as a reviewer, you should clearly say where you expect to have further explanation. It could be that the abstract doesn't include what I call a taster of the key results. The abstract's important because it is what is available most widely for potential readers to see, and if they can see that it contains a result which they're interested in, they're much more likely to read the paper in depth. It could be that the text of the paper doesn't match the title in the abstract, in which case it could be made to match up, maybe just by changing the abstract and the title to be consistent with the body of the paper. Minor revision would be that discussion and conclusions don't draw out the key issues, in which case, as a reviewer, you should say, give guidance to the author as to what they should draw out in the discussion and conclusions. You may wish to give some suggestions for further modification and smoothing of the language so that it is not tiring to read or not idiomatic. Now for the, hopefully the place where the author will get to at the end is a recommendation for accept. Well, the text of the paper has to be refer appropriately to the state of knowledge and practice, should be sound in its conception, its methods, the analysis, the evidence that it's gathered. It draws out issues clearly in the introduction, in the written up part of the methodology, and in discussion and conclusions. And the abstract should be a succinct summary of the key results and the innovation in the contribution. Now, it could be that I can still identify typographic corrections which need, or trivial changes in wording which need to be made. In that case, if they, in your opinion, don't require an editorial check, then you could still recommend acceptance, but on condition that these typographic corrections are made. And finally, you should have that your own opinion should be that the paper does make a distinctive contribution to advancement in knowledge, understanding, or practice in flood risk management. It should be of interest to the journal readership, and hopefully it should also have been of interest to you as a reviewer. Well, after submitting your review, you will get an automatic acknowledgement from the journal's review systems, Scholar One. The editor will copy to you the decision email sent to authors so that you know how the editors have viewed your review and told the authors what changes they need to make. If the recommendation from the editor is that the paper should be revised, you may receive an invitation to review the revised version. That's almost certain if there's been a recommendation for major revision, and quite possible if it is for minor revision. Occasionally, the editors will say that the amount of revision needed is so small that the editorial team are confident in doing it themselves, rather than engaging external reviewers again. I would say that it is good practice to re-review, and that you might keep a confidential and personal copy of your review notes to aid review. At least that's what I used to do when I started reviewing, but now you should have access to your previous review from within Scholar One. And a few closing comments. First of all, reviewing is voluntary and unpaid, but it does keep you up to date in the science in your area. And I'd say also that it's important as your own continuing professional development. And I'd say importantly that when you're preparing your review, that criticism is most beneficial for the authors, alongside with suggestions for how improvement should be made. And when you write papers, you will appreciate the care and thought given to by the reviewers. Now, do be careful when asking authors to cite your own work or own publications. It might be appropriate to do this, but it can reveal your identity. You have been asked to review because you know about the area, and therefore it is possible that you have already written things which are relevant to the paper, and it's quite right to identify that. However, don't use the opportunity to review as try to drive citations of your own work. It is quite possible that the editors will reject your review if that seems to be your only motivation in undertaking the review. Now, your role is not to correct poor language. You can give illustrations of difficult problems. The journal does offer language editing services to help authors. But if you wish to be kind to the authors, you can correct detail if you wish, but it is not essential.
Thanks, Paul. I hope you found Paul's presentations useful and enjoyed learning about the Journal of Flood Risk Management. If you want to find out any more, please do scroll down, and also don't forget to make a note of our live session timings. If you've got questions on the journal more widely, please email them to journals@cywem.org. Finally, I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference and exhibition. A huge amount of effort has gone in by my colleagues to making this the most enjoyable delegate experience possible, so I really hope that you love it.